The US military covered up an alien spacecraft crash in 1947. At least that's what millions of people still believe today. But here's what actually happened in Roswell, New Mexico, and why the truth might be even stranger than the myth. The Roswell incident is probably the most famous UFO story in history. It's been in countless movies, TV shows, and books. People have built entire careers around it. But most of what you think you know about Roswell is completely wrong. The real story involves Cold War secrets, military mistakes, and a series of events that spiraled completely out of control. And when you understand what really went down, you'll see why this myth became so powerful in the first place. So here's the thing. In early July 1947, something crashed on a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. That part is absolutely true. A rancher named Mac Brazel found debris scattered across his property. Weird metallic materials, strange sticks, and other stuff he'd never seen before. He took some of it into town, showed it to the local sheriff, and that's when things got interesting. The sheriff called the nearby Roswell Army Airfield, which was home to the 509th Bomb Group. This wasn't just any military base. These were the guys who dropped the atomic bombs on Japan just 2 years earlier. They were the only nuclear-capable unit in the entire world at that time. So when they got involved, people paid attention. Major Jesse Marcel, an intelligence officer from the base, went out to the ranch with another officer to check out the debris. They collected the materials and brought them back to the base, and this is where the military made their first massive mistake. On July 8, 1947, the public information officer at Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release. And get this, it said they had recovered a flying disc from a ranch near Roswell. A flying disc, those exact words. The Roswell Daily Record ran with the headline, "RAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." Can you imagine the chaos this caused? Remember, this was 1947. World War II had just ended. The Cold War was heating up. People were already nervous about technology and threats from the sky. And now the military is telling them they found a flying saucer. The story exploded across the country. But here's where it gets weird. Less than 24 hours later, the military completely changed their story. They held a press conference in Fort Worth, Texas, where Brigadier General Roger Ramey showed reporters the debris. And suddenly, it wasn't a flying disc anymore. It was just a weather balloon, a regular boring weather balloon with a radar reflector attached to it. General Ramey literally posed for photos with the balloon debris. The newspapers printed these photos. The story should have died right there. The military said, "Oops, our bad, it was just a weather balloon," and for the most part, people moved on. For about 30 years, Roswell was basically forgotten. It was just a weird footnote in history where the military got embarrassed. But then something happened in the late 1970s and early 1980s that brought Roswell back to life. UFO researchers started interviewing people who were there in 1947, and these people started telling very different stories than what the official record said. Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who originally collected the debris, gave an interview in 1978. He was retired by then and didn't have much to lose, and he said the weather balloon explanation was garbage. He described the materials as unlike anything he'd ever seen. Super thin metal that you couldn't dent or bend, materials with strange symbols on them, stuff that was way too advanced to be a simple weather balloon. Other witnesses came forward too. People who worked at the base, locals who lived in the area, and many of them told stories about military personnel acting very strangely, threatening people to keep quiet, cordoning off large areas, moving materials in the middle of the night. This didn't sound like the response to finding a weather balloon. Some witnesses even claimed they saw small bodies at the crash site. Not human bodies, small figures with large heads and strange features. These stories got more detailed and more dramatic as the years went on. By the 1990s, there were entire books claiming the military had recovered alien bodies and shipped them to secret facilities for study. The town of Roswell leaned into this hard. They built a UFO museum, started hosting annual UFO festivals, put alien faces on everything from street signs to restaurant menus. Roswell became synonymous with UFOs and government cover-ups. The economic impact was huge. Tourism brought in millions of dollars every year. But here's what makes this story so complicated. The government's explanations kept changing. First, it was a flying disc. Then it was a weather balloon. Then in 1994, almost 50 years after the incident, the Air Force released a new report, and this one told a completely different story. According to this 1994 report, the debris wasn't from a regular weather balloon. It was from a top-secret program called Project Mogul. This was a classified operation designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. They were launching high-altitude balloons with sensitive acoustic equipment that could pick up sound waves from nuclear explosions halfway around the world. These weren't normal weather balloons. They used advanced materials, special radar reflectors made with balsa wood and metallic foil, multiple balloons connected together that could fly at extremely high altitudes. And the whole program was so secret that even the officers at Roswell Army Airfield didn't know about it at first. This actually explains a lot. It explains why Major Marcel thought the materials were strange and advanced, because they were advanced for 1947. It explains why the military acted so secretively and made people sign non-disclosure agreements, because they were protecting classified technology, not alien bodies. And it explains why the initial press release said flying disc, because the officers genuinely didn't know what they were looking at and made assumptions. But wait, there's more. In 1997, the Air Force released yet another report. This one addressed the claims about alien bodies, and their explanation. The bodies that witnesses remembered seeing were actually anthropomorphic test dummies. The military was conducting high-altitude parachute tests in the 1950s, using these human-shaped dummies. Sometimes the dummies would fall in remote areas, and military teams would rush to recover them. The Air Force suggested that witnesses were mixing up their memories, combining the 1947 debris incident with these dummy recoveries from years later, creating a false memory of seeing strange bodies at the same time as the crash. This is actually a well-documented psychological phenomenon called memory contamination. How does this explanation satisfy everyone? Absolutely not. Critics point out major problems with the official story. The test dummy drops happened in the 1950s, not 1947. That's about a decade later. Asking people to confuse events that far apart seems like a stretch. Plus, many witnesses were military personnel and trained observers. Would they really mix up a crashed debris field with test dummy recoveries years later? There's also the issue of all the witness testimony. Hundreds of people have come forward over the years claiming to have seen something unusual or to have knowledge of a cover-up. Some of these people were high-ranking military officers with no obvious reason to lie. Deathbed confessions from people saying they were part of the recovery operation, sealed documents that never got declassified. And here's something interesting. Some researchers argue that even if it was Project Mogul, the level of secrecy and the aggressive response from the military still seems extreme. Why threaten civilians? Why collect every tiny piece of debris? Why change the story so quickly and clumsily? Even accounting for Cold War paranoia, the response seemed over the top. But let's look at the other side. The UFO explanation has its own problems. If the military recovered an alien spacecraft in 1947, they've managed to keep it secret for almost 80 years. That would involve thousands of people staying silent, no leaked photos that can be verified, no physical evidence that's ever been scientifically tested and confirmed. In an age where we can barely keep anything secret, somehow this massive cover-up has held for generations. Plus, the alien narrative evolved over time. Early accounts from 1947 didn't mention bodies at all. Those details got added later as the story grew. This pattern is really common with myths and legends. The story gets bigger and more dramatic with each retelling. New details get added. Memories get enhanced. Before long, the story barely resembles what actually happened. So what's the truth? Here's what we can say with reasonable certainty based on the evidence. Something did crash near Roswell in July 1947. That's not disputed. The military did recover debris and initially called it a flying disc. That's documented fact. They then changed their story to a weather balloon within 24 hours. Also documented. The most likely explanation, based on declassified documents and consistent evidence, is that it was Project Mogul. The materials matched, the timing matched, the location matched, the secrecy level matched. It's not a perfect explanation, but it's the one that requires the fewest assumptions and conspiracy theories. But here's the real kicker. The reason Roswell became such a powerful myth has almost nothing to do with what actually crashed that day. It's about timing, culture, and how humans process uncertainty. In 1947, people were terrified about nuclear war. They'd just seen 2 cities destroyed by atomic bombs. The Soviet Union was becoming a major threat. The future felt dangerous and unpredictable. Stories about advanced technology and threats from the sky resonated with those fears. Then in the late 1970s and 1980s, when Roswell came back into public consciousness, Americans had lost faith in their government. Watergate had happened. The Pentagon Papers had been leaked. People learned their government had lied to them about major things. So the idea of a UFO cover-up seemed totally plausible. Of course, the government would lie about aliens. They lied about everything else. The myth also filled a psychological need. The idea that we're not alone in the universe is compelling, that advanced beings might exist who could solve our problems or at least make us feel less isolated. UFOs and aliens became a modern mythology, replacing older religious and supernatural beliefs for some people. And there's the appeal of secret knowledge. People who believe in the Roswell cover-up get to feel like they're part of a group that knows the truth while everyone else is fooled. That's a powerful feeling. It gives meaning and importance to your beliefs. The Roswell incident is fascinating, not because aliens crashed in New Mexico, but because it shows how myths are created and why they persist. It's a perfect storm of government secrecy, meeting public fear, meeting cultural needs. The actual debris was probably from a Cold War spy program. But the story that grew around it became something much bigger. Does this mean everyone who believes in the Roswell UFO is wrong or foolish? No. Many of the questions about the incident are legitimate. The government's handling of the situation was terrible. Their explanations have been inconsistent. And there are still some loose ends that don't quite fit the official narrative. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and after almost 80 years, we still don't have any verified physical evidence of alien technology or bodies. What we have is a fascinating Cold War mystery that got turned into the most famous UFO story in history. The truth is usually more complicated than either the believers or the skeptics want to admit. Real history is messy. It doesn't fit into neat categories of complete cover-up or totally explained. There are always gaps in our knowledge, always questions we can't fully answer. What we can do is look at the evidence honestly, understand the historical context, and recognize why certain stories appeal to us. The Roswell myth persists because it touches something deep in human psychology, our need for mystery, our suspicion of authority, our hope that something bigger and more meaningful exists beyond our everyday lives. So the next time someone brings up Roswell, you'll know the real story, not the alien conspiracy version, and not the oversimplified weather balloon dismissal. The actual complicated, messy, interesting historical reality. A Cold War secret that accidentally became the world's most famous UFO incident because of a careless press release and decades of cultural evolution. And honestly, that real story is pretty amazing on its own. It doesn't need aliens to be interesting. It just needs people who are willing to look past the myth and see the fascinating human story underneath. If you want more videos breaking down famous historical myths, hit subscribe.